talked about spiritual awakening in history, there was a woman almost nobody remembers. Imagine this. You're living what looks like a perfect royal life. Palace, prince husband, beautiful baby boy, everything a human being could ask for in ancient India. Then one morning, you open your eyes, and he is simply gone. Not at work, not on a trip, just vanished into nothing. Your baby is crying in the next room, the servants are whispering, and you have no idea whether your husband is dead, taken, or just walked away because you were no longer enough to stay for. Depending on which tradition you trust, 6 years go by, some say even 15. And then this man appears at your door. But he is not the husband you lost. He has become the Buddha, the awakened one, the teacher everyone now calls the greatest mind to ever walk the earth. And you are still the woman he left behind. But that is not the real story at all. The woman who was abandoned did not disappear. She rose. She became one of the most powerful spiritual figures of her age. She did not merely survive betrayal. She turned that wound into transformation. Today we are uncovering the story nobody teaches you. Yasodhara, the Buddha's wife, the woman who turned heartbreak into awakening and quietly changed the direction of spirituality forever. By the end of this video, you may never look at Buddha's journey the same way again. Ancient India, 500 BCE. In the borderlands where India and Nepal meet today, this story begins long before either of them were born. According to the Jataka tales, these two souls were tied together across lifetimes. In one former life, Yasodhara was a devoted wife praying for her husband's spiritual success. In another, both of them were seeking enlightenment side by side. Some Buddhist traditions even say their meeting was no accident at all. Destiny was moving the pieces. Yasodhara was not some ordinary princess waiting around for rescue. Born into the Shakya clan, the same royal family as Siddhartha, she was brilliant, sharp, and the kind of woman who could stand her ground in philosophical debates and political conversations. The Lalita Vistara Sutra describes their marriage as a grand ceremony, but most people miss the important part. Before Siddhartha could marry her, he had to prove himself in contests against other suitors. Archery, sword fighting, intellectual challenges. And Yasodhara? She was never a trophy to be handed over. She was choosing too. When they finally married, palace life looked flawless. Gold everywhere, servants moving at her command, 3 palaces for different seasons because why not? Their son, Rahula, was born, and for a while, everything looked like a storybook ending. But Yasodhara was paying attention. She noticed the late-night walks where Siddhartha would stare at the stars for hours, the long silences during meals, the strange questions about suffering that seemed to appear from nowhere, the restlessness growing in his eyes. She was smart enough to feel that something was shifting. But no one, not even someone as perceptive as Yasodhara, could have guessed what would happen next. The night it happened, Yasodhara was sleeping peacefully beside her husband and baby son. According to the Mahavastu, one of the earliest Buddhist texts, Siddhartha looked at his sleeping family one last time. Some versions say he almost woke her. Others say he kissed their foreheads goodbye. But in the end, he chose silence. He took his horse, Kantaka, his charioteer, Chana, and disappeared into the dark. Morning came. Yasodhara reached across the bed. Empty. She called his name. Silence. She rushed through the palace, asking servants, guards, anyone. Nobody had answers. Then the brutal truth landed all at once. Her husband, her child's father, the future king, had left without a single word. Stop for a second and feel that. The confusion, the humiliation, the shock. But this is where Yasodhara's power begins to show. While many women would have broken, she turned furious. Not a little angry, deeply angry. He had not left for duty, war, or another woman. He had abandoned his son, his people, and everything they had built together. Without explanation, without purpose, without even the dignity of a goodbye. The palace filled with whispers. Nearby kingdoms whispered too. Captured, insane, or simply weak. And Yasodhara was left with baby Rahula in her arms, standing under the judgment of a society that always blamed wives when husbands disappeared. Ancient India was not kind to single mothers, especially royal ones whose husbands had vanished. Instead of hiding in shame, Yasodhara kept her head high and raised Rahula alone. Years passed. No letters, no messages, no proof he was even alive. The woman who once had everything now had to rebuild her world from zero. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Yasodhara had nearly given up hope of ever seeing him again. Then the stories began to arrive. Merchants traveling through the kingdom spoke of a strange teacher near Bodh Gaya, a man talking about suffering and liberation, someone who sounded eerily familiar. At first, Yasodhara dismissed it. India was full of wandering teachers and holy men. Why would this one be different? But something inside her had changed over those years of abandonment. The luxury of palace life, the gold, the servants, the endless rituals, they all felt empty now, hollow. She began going to temples, not for display, not for royal duty, but because she was searching for something real, something that could explain why her perfect life had cracked apart. Then, one day, a traveling monk came to the palace gates. He spoke about a teacher called the Buddha, the awakened one. This teacher had discovered the root of suffering. He could explain why people hurt, why nothing stays forever, why attachment leads to pain. The monk described the Buddha's background. Royal birth, left his palace, abandoned wife and child, went out to seek the truth. And when Yasodhara heard that the teacher was a prince from the Shakya clan named Siddhartha Gautama, her blood turned cold. The room seemed to spin. Her missing husband, the man who had disappeared without explanation, had become the most famous spiritual teacher in India. First came relief. He was alive. Then anger. Then confusion. Then something she had not expected at all. Curiosity. The Vinaya Pitaka tells us that 6 years after his enlightenment, Buddha decided to return to his homeland. Yasodhara heard the news before most people did. Servants whispered about preparations. The king was arranging a huge welcome for the enlightened prince. The entire kingdom was buzzing with excitement. Everyone, except Yasodhara. She made a choice that shocked the court. While every other royal family member rushed to greet Buddha at the city gates, she stayed in the palace. She was not going to run toward him as if nothing had happened. If he wanted to see her, he could come to her. Hours passed. Then footsteps approached her chamber. The man who entered looked like Siddhartha, yet not quite the same. He was calmer, more present. His eyes held a depth that had not been there before. He wore simple robes instead of royal silk. The old texts skip the personal details, but it is easy to imagine the weight of that moment. Years of separation, two people who had become entirely different. He had found enlightenment by walking away from everything. She had found strength by staying and rebuilding. Both had changed, but in opposite directions. Maybe no grand words were needed, only the recognition of who they had become. He had discovered awakening through renunciation. She had discovered power through endurance. But the reunion was not complete yet, because there was one more person waiting. Their son, Rahula, now 7 years old, meeting his father for the first time since infancy. That meeting is a story of its own, and we will save it for another video. Then came the real shock. After their private conversation, Yasodhara made an announcement that stunned everyone around her. She wanted to join the Sangha, the community of Buddhist practitioners, not to follow her husband, but to walk her own path toward enlightenment. This is where her story becomes revolutionary, and where most history books conveniently skip the important parts. At first, Buddha refused her, not because he doubted her ability, but because the Sangha only allowed men, no women. That was the rule. But Yasodhara was not the kind of woman who quietly accepted no. She joined forces with Mahapajapati Gautami, Buddha's stepmother, along with several other royal women. Together, they approached Buddha again and again. He kept saying no, so they did something unheard of. They shaved their heads, dressed in yellow robes, and went to the monastery anyway. Picture it. A group of women, former princesses and queens, standing at the gates of an all-male religious community, asking for equal access to spiritual training. This was not 2024. This was 500 BCE. Women challenging religious authority, completely unheard of. Finally, after pressure from his cousin Ananda, Buddha gave in. He created the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of Buddhist nuns. Yasodhara became one of the first women ever ordained in the Buddhist tradition. But she did not stop there. The Therigatha, a collection of verses by early Buddhist nuns, includes Yasodhara's own words. Listen to this. I have cut off my hair. I have put on the yellow robe. I live by alms. I was once a woman of great beauty, and now I am free from attachment. She was not celebrating becoming a nun because she wanted to be close to her former husband. She was celebrating freedom. Freedom from everything that had once defined her. Beauty, marriage, status, royal privilege.
Yasodhara developed her own teaching style, her own insights, her own circle of followers. She became known for helping other women understand that spiritual awakening did not require silent suffering. She taught that pain, abandonment, and betrayal were not barriers to enlightenment. They were gateways into understanding the temporary nature of all relationships, all situations, all identities. Some traditions say Yasodhara attained arahantship. Some even claim she reached the same level of liberation as the Buddha himself, complete enlightenment. The woman once known only as Buddha's wife had become something far more powerful. Yasodhara the Enlightened. So why do we know so little about her? Why is she not mentioned in every Buddhism class alongside the Buddha himself? The truth is harsh. Early Buddhist texts were preserved orally, passed from monk to monk, written down by male scholars, and interpreted through centuries of male-dominated institutions. Male historians simplified women's stories, minimized them, and sometimes erased them completely. The official story became, Buddha left his wife and child to seek enlightenment. End of story. Her pain became a footnote. Her spiritual achievements became side notes. Even when texts mention Yasodhara, they focus on her as the abandoned wife instead of the pioneering teacher she became. This pattern repeats across history. How many female disciples vanished from Christianity? How many women mystics disappeared from Islamic texts? How many Hindu female sages were forgotten? Today, scholarship is finally beginning to recover those lost voices. Buddhist feminists and historians are digging into the Therigatha, examining archaeological evidence and questioning old interpretations. And what are they finding? That early Buddhism had far more female leadership than most of us were ever taught. Women did not just follow men into spiritual life. They created their own paths. They developed their own practices. They reached their own enlightenment. Yasodhara was not special because she was Buddha's wife. She was special because she transformed private suffering into universal wisdom. She broke gender barriers that had existed for centuries. She proved that enlightenment does not mean running away from responsibility. It means changing the way you carry it. But her story leaves us with a haunting question. How many other Yasodharas have existed throughout history? How many women turned pain into strength, abandonment into awakening, silence into power, and had their stories buried because they did not fit the version men wanted to tell? Buddhism teaches that every being has Buddha nature, that everyone can awaken, that gender, class, and background do not matter on the spiritual path. Yasodhara proved that teaching in real life. She did not need permission to become enlightened. She did not need her husband to guide her to truth. She already had what she needed: intelligence, discipline, and the courage to convert suffering into wisdom. So we arrive at the end of a story that is really the beginning of another. Yasodhara's journey teaches us something deep about resilience, about transformation, about refusing to let somebody else's decisions define your worth. She did not wait to be rescued. She did not waste decades drowning in bitterness. She did not define herself through someone else's spiritual path. Instead, she took the worst moment of her life and used it as raw material for awakening. Think about that. The pain of being left behind became her doorway into impermanence. The shame of public abandonment became her lesson about the illusion of status. The struggle of raising a child alone became her training in compassion and strength. Modern psychology calls it post-traumatic growth. Buddhism calls it the transformation of suffering into wisdom. Yasodhara simply lived it. Her story matters because it gives us a different model of spiritual growth. Not the dramatic escape from everything, but the patient transformation of everything. Not running from responsibility, but embracing it with awareness. She became a teacher, a leader, a pioneer, and a mother. She proved that spiritual growth does not require choosing between your own awakening and caring for others. The woman history tried to forget. The voice patriarchy tried to silence. The story traditional Buddhism tried to reduce. It turns out to be one of the most powerful examples of enlightenment we have. As we deal with our own disappointments, betrayals, and moments of being left behind, Yasodhara's life speaks across 2,500 years. Your abandonment is not your ending. Your suffering is not your identity. Your pain is not your prison. These are your teachers if you are brave enough to learn from them. Maybe the real question is not what Buddhism would look like if we heard more women's voices. Maybe the real question is, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting for someone else to give you permission to change?